This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Utilitarianism is an ethical movement that began in the 18th century. It dictates that the best course of action is the one that benefits the majority. Here, you will discover an essay about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism theory argues that the consequence of an action determines whether that particular action is morally right or wrong. Philosophers behind this theory include Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, Richard Mervyn Hare, and Peter Singer. All these philosophers evaluate the morality of actions depending on overall happiness or well-being. Thus, they see utilitarianism as a consequentialist ethic. Consequentialist ethics holds that in determining whether an act, policy, rule, or motive is morally right, we should check whether it has good consequences for all affected persons. Rather than asking if an action has good consequences for a person, we should just inquire whether that action adds to the person's happiness. Therefore, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that centers on happiness, not just one person's happiness, but many people's happiness. Thus, the greatest happiness principle is synonymous with the principle of utility. The principle of greatest happiness states that a person should do things that will have the most happiness for all involved persons. Critics of utilitarian ethics argue that because utilitarianism emphasizes results, utilitarian theorists should agree that the theory of ethical relativism solves the problem of relativism. These critics claim that since utilitarian theorists argue that the morality of an action depends on what the product of the action will take to all affected persons, then almost every action is moral. That is to say, utilitarianism is a consequentialistic ethic, and thus, we cannot know whether an action is immoral until we see its harmful consequences. Given that utilitarian ethics, in some ways, hold the morality of an action hostage to the result, the morality of the action appears relative. However, we refute ethical relativism since utilitarian ethics is a type of universalism, given its grounds in trust in universal human nature. Utilitarian theorists say that all people have altruistic and egoistic elements, and all people seek to evade pain and augment pleasure. Then, instead of ethical relativism, they support liberal ethics that acknowledges there are universal principles and values. The utilitarian perspective that ethics is more inclined to our feelings and not our rationality may seem to give evidence that utilitarianism is a type of relativism. Obviously, people have different outlooks on different matters. However, the description of ethics may not always be from this perspective. Think about a cruel act such as premeditated murder. How comes this act is immoral? Is it due to societal, divine, or natural laws? The truth is that human beings cannot make the moral judgment that premeditated murder is immoral until they experience negative sentiments about such acts. Suppose there are human beings who do not get negative sentiments after reflecting on the idea of premeditated murder or other monstrous acts. In that case, it is because those persons have something wrong with them and, thus, cannot feel others' pain. Desensitization is the contemporary psychological word that describes why some people may not feel the pain of others. People become desensitized, making them not feel others' pain. This psychological thought matches perfectly well with the utilitarian idea of sentience. However, human nature is universal, and universal ethics rests upon nothing more than human sentiments. At the center of the utilitarian argument that shifts from the physical concern for our personal feelings of pain and pleasure to others' feelings of pain and pleasure is the belief that this is the nature of human beings. When we hear about calamities happening to others, we may find ourselves flinching or grimacing. However, to go from a claim about our human nature to a moral claim that we ought to do this, and it is correct that we do this, and wrong when we fail to do this, includes an extra step in the argument. The crucial step is to ask ourselves whether there is actually a difference between our pains and joys and other people's pains and joys. This, for instance, is a problem for any racist. If dissimilar races experience equal pleasures and pains, then how come one race sees itself as superior to another race? If there is actually no difference between our pains and pleasures with others' pains and pleasures, then we ought to, just due to consistency, view their suffering as just as significant as ours. This is the heart of the justification of the utility theory. We should do what will have the best outcomes for all persons involved, not only for ourselves, since there is no significant difference between our welfare and other people's welfare. It is clear that equality is the central concept involved in this reasoning. A different way to portray the central utilitarian concept is just to say humans are equal. Your pain or happiness is equal to another person's anguish or happiness. However, another person's happiness, well-being, suffering, pleasure, and pain are not more crucial than yours. Hence, considering ethics along the utilitarian line takes us from egoism through altruism to equality. Other critics of utilitarianism argue that it is difficult and impossible to apply its principles. Those that hold that it is difficult to apply utilitarian principles argue that calculating the outcomes for all persons is impractical due to uncertainty and the large number involved. The truth, however, is that utilitarianism offers a clear way of determining whether an action is moral or not, and this does not involve calculations. As mentioned earlier, a morally right action should have pleasurable consequences. Therefore, a person who says that it is challenging to apply this theory should support his/her claims with examples of actions that produce pleasurable outcomes but are wrong. Therefore, the argument that it is difficult to calculate what is right does not hold any water since it has no harm to the principle of utility. Rather, this is a problem of the human condition. Other critics that oppose the application of utilitarian principles argue that it is not possible to gauge or quantify happiness and there is no defined method of weighing happiness against suffering. However, the truth is that happiness is measurable and comparable through words like happier and happiest. If it were not measurable, then these words would have little meaning. In conclusion, the theory of utilitarianism is sound, logical, and consistent. Utilitarian ethics follow the law of greatest happiness. According to this law, human beings seek to decrease suffering and maximize happiness. Hence, an action that is morally correct must lead to the greatest possible pleasure. This also implies that actions that cause pain to human beings are morally wrong. As seen in the arguments above, this theory is beyond reproach, as it caters to all possible objections. This essay on utilitarianism theory, philosophy and ethics was written and submitted by a student just like you. The Ivy Panda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one, on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for, free of charge.